I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I heard the iPad chime from the living room. My son, Jake's iPad. He'd left it on the sofa before rushing out to football practice, and normally I wouldn't have touched it, but the screen was facing up and I could see the notification clearly from where I stood. It was a message preview from someone saved as M. The text made my stomach drop. "We have to be more careful. Mom almost saw us yesterday." My hands went cold. I set down the cloth and walked slowly toward the sofa, my heart beginning to hammer in my chest. I picked up the iPad with shaking fingers. The screen hadn't locked yet. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But something primal and terrifying was unfurling in my gut, and I couldn't stop myself. I tapped the Messages app. What I found made me physically nauseous. There were over 500 messages in the thread with M. 500. The most recent ones were from this morning. I scrolled up, my breath coming faster and faster. The messages weren't what I expected. They weren't about drugs or some secret girlfriend or even something as simple as bullying. They were detailed, intimate conversations about my daughter, about Emma, Jake's 15-year-old sister. I watched her getting changed through the gap in her door again. One message read, "She didn't know I was there." My vision blurred. I had to read it 3 times before my brain would process the words. I scrolled further, and each message was worse than the last. Discussions about Emma's body, about what she wore, about moments when she was vulnerable or alone. The timestamps went back months, nearly a year, and M was responding, encouraging him, adding their own observations, their own disgusting commentary about my daughter. I dropped the iPad like it had burned me, but then I picked it back up because I had to know who M was. 6 months earlier, life had felt beautifully ordinary. My name is Rachel, and I'd spent 17 years building what I thought was a solid, loving family. My husband Mark worked long hours as a contractor, but he was devoted to our kids. Jake was 16, a decent student, popular at school, always glued to his devices like every other teenager. Emma was 15, artistic and sensitive, the kind of girl who still left me little notes in my work bag telling me she loved me. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. Jake and Emma had always been close when they were younger, the way siblings are before adolescence drives wedges between them. They'd had their typical squabbles as they grew older, but nothing that concerned me. Jake sometimes teased Emma about her art or her choice of music, but it seemed harmless. Normal sibling stuff. Looking back now, I realize how blind I'd been. It started small. Emma began spending more time in her room, with the door closed. She stopped wearing certain clothes, the ones she used to love, replacing them with oversized hoodies even in warm weather. When I asked if everything was okay at school, she'd nod quickly and change the subject. I assumed it was typical teenage moodiness, maybe friendship drama or body image issues. I tried to give her space while making sure she knew I was there if she needed me. Jake seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. He'd grown confident, almost cocky. He spent hours on his iPad and phone, but again, I thought that was normal. All his friends were the same. Mark and I had installed parental controls when they were younger, but we'd gradually relax them as they got older and prove themselves trustworthy. Jake's grades were solid. He wasn't getting into trouble. Why would I have suspected anything? The first Betrayal crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd gone upstairs to put away laundry and passed Emma's room. Her door was slightly ajar, and I could hear her crying. Not the dramatic teenage crying over a breakup or a failed test, but deep, broken sobs that made my maternal instinct scream. I knocked gently and pushed the door open. Emma was curled up on her bed, her face buried in her pillow. I sat beside her and stroked her hair, asking what was wrong. She wouldn't tell me at first. She just kept crying and saying everything was fine, that she was just tired. But I pressed gently, and eventually she whispered something that chilled me. She said she felt like someone was always watching her, that she couldn't feel safe in her own home. Asked if someone at school was bothering her, or if something had happened online. She shook her head, but wouldn't elaborate. I suggested we talk to her father or maybe see a counselor, but she panicked at that idea. She begged me not to tell anyone, said she was probably just being paranoid, that she'd be fine. She looked so frightened that I reluctantly agreed to keep it between us for now, but I made her promise to come to me if things got worse. That night, I lay awake beside Mark, listening to him snore, wondering what I was missing. I thought about predators online, about creeps at school, about all the dangers modern teenage girls faced. It never once occurred to me to look inside my own home. The next morning, I started paying closer attention to Emma. I noticed she'd started changing clothes in her bathroom instead of her bedroom. She kept her blinds closed constantly, even during the day. When Jake walked past her in the hallway, she'd press herself against the wall as if trying to disappear. I told myself I was reading too much into things. Then came the incident with the bathroom. Emma had been taking a shower one evening when she suddenly screamed. I ran upstairs, my heart in my throat, and found her wrapped in a towel in the hallway, shaking and dripping wet. She pointed at the bathroom door. There was a small hole in the wooden panel, right at eye level, that I'd never noticed before. It looked deliberate. Drilled. When I asked Jake if he knew anything about it, he shrugged and said maybe it had always been there and we'd just never seen it. Mark examined it and concluded it was old damage, probably from when we'd first moved in. He filled it with wood putty that same night. Emma didn't say anything more about it, but I saw the way she looked at her brother across the dinner table. There was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. And something else. Resignation, maybe. I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded answers. But I was terrified of what I might find, and some cowardly part of me wanted to believe that everything was fine. Standing in my living room with Jake's iPad in my hands, reading those messages, all those little moments suddenly reassembled themselves into a horrifying picture. My hands trembled as I forced myself to scroll through the entire thread. Turned out to be someone named Mason, a boy from Jake's school. The messages revealed a sick game they'd been playing for almost a year. They'd been spying on Emma, sharing photos they'd taken without her knowledge, raiding her body, discussing elaborate plans to see more. Some of the photos were in the thread. I saw images of Emma in her room, taken through her partially open door. Emma in the bathroom, captured through that hole Jake had definitely drilled. Emma bending over in the kitchen, photographed from behind. Emma asleep on the sofa in a tank top. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. When I could breathe again, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My son. My 16-year-old son had been violating his sister's privacy and sharing the evidence with his friend like she was some kind of entertainment. How long had this been going on? What else had I missed? I needed to think clearly. I needed evidence. I took screenshots of everything on Jake's iPad, every single message and photo, and emailed them to myself. Then I checked the photo gallery. My stomach churned as I scrolled through hundreds of images. Most were normal teenage photos, friends and memes and screenshots. But scattered throughout were more photos of Emma. So many photos. There were videos too. I couldn't bring myself to watch them all, but I watched enough. Footage of Emma walking around the house in her pajamas, filmed from around corners. Videos of her doing homework at the kitchen table, the camera focused on her chest. I felt like I was drowning. The front door opened. Emma's voice called out that she was home from art club. I hastily closed the iPad and shoved it back onto the sofa, trying to compose myself. Emma appeared in the doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and the sight of her sweet, innocent face made me want to scream. I asked if she'd had a good day, my voice somehow steady. She nodded quietly and headed upstairs. I watched her go, saw the way she moved quickly, and kept her arms wrapped around herself protectively. How had I not seen it? How had I convinced myself this was just teenage awkwardness? Jake wouldn't be home for another hour. Mark was working late. I sat down on the sofa and tried to figure out what to do. Should I call the police immediately? Confront Jake first? Tell Mark? Talk to Emma? Every option felt impossible. This was my son. My baby boy. The child I'd nursed and raised and loved for 16 years. How could he have done this? But then I thought about Emma, and rage replaced the grief. I decided to search Jake's room while I had the chance. I felt like a criminal as I climbed the stairs and pushed open his door. His room was the typical disaster area of a teenage boy, clothes and sports equipment scattered everywhere. I started with his desk drawers, then his closet, then under his bed. Under his mattress, I found a notebook. It was spiral-bound, the cover decorated with band stickers. I opened it, and my blood turned to ice. Inside were handwritten entries, a journal of sorts, but not the kind any mother wants to find. Jake had been documenting his observations of Emma for over a year. He'd written detailed descriptions of what she wore each day, times when she was alone in the house, speculations about her body, fantasies I can't bring myself to repeat. There were sketches too, crude drawings. I slammed the notebook shut, my whole body shaking. At the very back, tucked into the spiral binding, I found something else. A small USB drive. I took it downstairs to my laptop and plugged it in with shaking hands. The drive contained hundreds more photos and videos. Some were from Jake's phone and iPad, but others were from different angles, different devices. I realized with growing horror that he must have set up cameras. Hidden cameras in the house. I found the footage from those cameras. Multiple angles of Emma's room, the bathroom, the hallway. Hours and hours of recordings. This wasn't just a teenage boy's inappropriate curiosity. This was systematic. This was predatory. And then I found the folder labeled for later. Inside were edited videos. Jake had taken the footage of Emma and created compilations, adding music, zooming in on specific parts of her body. These weren't just private recordings. These were productions. And the file metadata showed they'd been uploaded to cloud storage and shared with multiple email addresses. My son hadn't just been violating his sister. He'd been distributing the material. I heard Jake's voice outside. He was home from practice. I ejected the USB drive and shoved it in my pocket, my mind racing. I needed to protect Emma. I needed to end this. But I also needed more information. I needed to know the full extent of what had been done and who else was involved. When Jake walked in, sweaty and cheerful, asking what was for dinner, I smiled and told him to shower first. He bounded upstairs like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't spent the last year treating his sister like prey. I waited until I heard the shower running, then I grabbed his iPad again and opened his email. I found the shared cloud folder. There were 6 other people with access. 6 teenage boys from his school, including Mason. They created a group chat on an encrypted messaging app, sharing not just content of Emma, but of other girls too. Sisters, classmates, neighbors. It was an organized ring. They had a rankings list. Emma was number 3 that night. After everyone was asleep, I sat in my car in the driveway and called the police. I told them everything. I provided the screenshots, the notebook, the USB drive, the email evidence. 2 officers came to the house at 6 in the morning. They woke Jake and arrested him in his bedroom. Emma woke up to the commotion and watched from her doorway as they led her brother out in handcuffs. Mark stood beside me in shock, demanding to know what was happening. I told him. I showed him everything. Mark broke down. He couldn't believe it. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that Jake was a good kid, that maybe it was just a phase or a joke gone too far. But the evidence was undeniable. Our son had victimized our daughter for over a year, and he'd collaborated with others to victimize more girls. The investigation moved quickly. The police seized devices from all 6 boys in the ring. They found thousands of images and videos. The charges included voyeurism, creation and distribution of exploited. Because the boys had used their devices to share the content across state lines, federal authorities got involved. Emma fell apart. She'd suspected someone was watching her, but had convinced herself she was paranoid. Learning it was her own brother, that he'd been documenting her most private moments and sharing them with his friends, shattered something inside her. She stopped eating. She stopped going to school. She sat in her room for hours, staring at the walls. I got her into therapy immediately. The therapist explained that Emma was experiencing trauma similar to sexual assault survivors. Her sense of safety, privacy, and bodily autonomy had been violated by the person who should have protected her. By her own family. The therapist said recovery would take years. Jake showed no remorse at first. In his initial interview with the police, he claimed he didn't see what the big deal was. She was his sister. He lived in the same house. How was taking a few pictures any different from just looking? It wasn't until his lawyer explained the severity of the charges that fear finally appeared in his eyes. The trial took 8 months. All 6 boys were charged, but Jake's case was the most severe because of the quantity of material and his role in organizing the group. The prosecution presented every message, every photo, every video. The courtroom was packed with families of the other victims. Emma gave a victim impact statement that destroyed me. She described lying awake at night, feeling eyes on her even when she was alone. She talked about hating her own body because her brother had turned it into an object. She said she'd started cutting herself to feel like she had control over something. She said she'd tried to kill herself twice. I didn't know about the suicide attempts. That revelation was what finally broke Mark. He'd been clinging to some fantasy that we could get through this as a family, that Jake could get help and we could heal together. But sitting in that courtroom, listening to Emma describe her pain while Jake sat there with his lawyer, Mark realized we'd lost our son. Maybe we'd never really had him at all. Jake was sentenced to 3 years in juvenile detention followed by 5 years of probation. He'd have to register as a sex offender. The other boys received similar sentences. Mason's family moved away. 2 of the other families divorced. Our family didn't survive either. Mark and I separated 6 months after the trial. We couldn't look at each other without seeing our failures. We'd created a monster and hadn't noticed until he'd already destroyed our daughter. Mark blamed himself for working too much, for not being present. I blamed myself for ignoring the signs. We both blamed each other, though we never said it out loud. Emma moved in with my sister for her final years of high school. She needed space from the house, from the memories, from me. I understood. Every time she looked at me, I saw the question in her eyes. Why didn't you protect me? I asked myself the same thing. Jake writes to me from detention sometimes. His letters are full of justifications and excuses. He says the other boys pressured him. He says he didn't understand it was wrong. He says he's sorry, but his apologies feel hollow, mechanical, like words his therapist told him to write. I don't think he truly comprehends what he's destroyed. I keep the letters in a box in my closet. I don't know why. Maybe because they're evidence that he existed, this boy I thought I knew. Maybe because someday I'll need to remember exactly how I failed. Emma is 19 now. She's at art school in another state. We talk sometimes, brief phone calls where she tells me about her classes, and I tell her I'm proud of her. The conversations are strained, painful. We both know we're play acting at a relationship that died the day I found those messages. She's created a series of paintings about her experience. They're raw and disturbing and beautiful. One sold at a student exhibition for $3,000. The buyer was a survivors advocacy group. Emma donated the money to an organization that helps victims of family violence. She's stronger than I ever was. She's taking her pain and turning it into something meaningful. I'm just existing, day to day, in a half-empty house full of ghosts. I think about the little things I missed constantly. The way Jake always seemed to be nearby when Emma was changing clothes. The way he'd angle his phone just so at the dinner table. The way Emma stopped hugging him, stopped talking to him, stopped existing in the same space as him whenever possible. She was trying to tell me without words, and I didn't listen. Sometimes late at night, I'll get a message from Emma. Just a few words. Thinking of you, Mom. Or hope you're okay. These small gestures give me hope that maybe, someday, we can rebuild something. Not what we had before. That's gone forever. But maybe something new. Something honest. Built on the ashes of our old life. Mark sees Jake regularly. He says our son is doing better, that he's genuinely working on himself now. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him. I don't know if Emma will either. That's her choice to make, not mine. The house is on the market. I can't live here anymore, surrounded by memories of the family I thought I had. I'm moving to a small apartment across town, starting over at 43, alone, carrying the weight of my failures. But here's what I learned, and maybe this is why I'm telling you this story now. We assume the danger is outside our homes. We warn our children about strangers on the internet, about predators in parking lots, about all the external threats waiting to hurt them. We install security systems to keep the bad guys out. We never think to protect them from the person sleeping in the bedroom next door. If you're a parent, please listen to your children. Not just their words, but their silences. Watch for changes in behavior, in mood, in how they move through their own home. When your child tells you they don't feel safe, believe them. Investigate. Push past the uncomfortable conversations. I wish I had. I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd trusted my instincts instead of protecting my comfortable illusion of a happy family. Emma deserved better. She deserved a mother who saw. She deserved a family where her brother was her protector, not her predator. She deserved safety in her own home. I can't give her any of that now. All I can do is tell our story and hope that maybe, somewhere, another mother will listen to that little voice warning her something's wrong. That she'll act instead of explaining it away. That she'll save her daughter before it's too late. Because I didn't. And I'll spend the rest of my life living with that failure. Some stories end, but others begin right here. Keep growing with the telling tree. Like, subscribe, and stay with us.